Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you going to live there or are you just visiting? Let's check in with Mary Fran and Kristen to learn how to come through not broken, but brilliant.
Hey everyone, before we dive into this week's episode, we have a resource that we wanted to tell you about.
Transform every week of yours with our Brilliance Bit that will deliver right to your email inbox. Sign up for it at brilliantlyresilient.net and keep living brilliantly resilient.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brilliantly Resilient Live. We have an amazing guest today. She has so many things going on that we want to talk about. Renee C. Bauer. Thank you so much for joining us, Renee. I'm going to read a little bit of your bio here, and then we are going to get into it. So Renee is an entrepreneur, author, peacemaker, gotta love that, and blended family aficionado. And Renee is dedicated to helping others find their happy even after. Renee was born in the suburbs of Boston, has an accent that loves to sneak out when she's excited, angry, or just when she spent a weekend with her family. I have that with my South Philly relatives, so I can relate. Won awards, faced her fear of public speaking, litigated cases in a courtroom, and grew a business from nothing but a folding table into a thriving family law firm in Connecticut. Renee has an awesome son, 3 stepkids, married to a man now who is her partner in every sense of the word, but those bumps and bruises along the way led her to the happiest, most complete, most purposeful version of herself. Here's what I love. Renee believes that doing the big, scary, uncomfortable thing can be the most rewarding and fulfilling experience of your life. And Renee is also the founder of the She Who Wins Summit.
Good stuff.
So many things going on. But I want to jump right into the whole happy even after. Just the name of that is just a wonderfully hopeful place for people who are going into divorce, which is what your law firm specialized in. It's a wonderfully hopeful place to look forward to. And so where did you come up with the name? I'm assuming that was the goal.
Well, you know what? It went through a transition of like the law offices of, and all of the typical like boring lawyer offices. And then I realized I'm like, okay, what are we doing different than other law firms? And it was the client experience of what we were helping them to walk through as they went through a divorce. And it was so much more than just the law. It was like, all right, because the truth of it is when clients got their mindset right, they became easier clients. They spent less money, which despite what people think, most lawyers don't want to actually spend all of the money and don't want to go to trial. And they became happier on the other side, and they weren't so busy blaming their lawyers and their exes. And so it was like, all right, what can we do beyond just guiding them through what the law says? It was really helping them shift their mindset that this divorce that is happening to them is just a moment in their life. And I'm twice divorced, so like I get it. And when you're in it, it feels so horrible and you want to blame everyone. And it's so easy to want to be the victim, but that keeps you stuck. And really, in order to find your happiness on the other side is fixing what's happening in your own head and making peace with it and healing, acknowledging the role that you played, forgiving an ex. It doesn't mean you have to accept them or even actually tell them that you forgive them, but forgive them within yourself so you can move on. And that was the whole premise behind Happy Even After, that, a plot twist might happen, but it doesn't mean it's the end. And now you have this beautiful opportunity to create something else, create any life that you want.
And you do this
I can
your
see Kristen's brain firing and firing and firing. She's
this
like,
is what you do through your law firm?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
because I had to build, my lawyer was just a part of the team. I had to build a whole other group of people to do everything that you just said.
Yeah, and that's it. I'm super picky on who is part of my team, and everyone has to have the right mindset, mentality, and outlook, and kind of treat all of that process the same way. And so it started with me of figuring it out, like recognizing, oh, if I work with clients, if I spend 20 minutes and work with them on something that has nothing to do with the law, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to get through everything else in a really easy way. And so that's how I started to build what the law firm was, and our philosophy and our vision and process and all of that.
Wow. And I'm guessing that you've seen, we don't have time for your gajillion stories, but I'm sure that you've seen some people really some amazing transformation that you were a part of with this.
Yeah. And one of my favorite, and I won't spend much time on it, but one of my absolute favorite stories is a woman who came to me, and she was middle-aged. She didn't want the divorce. She was happy enough. Life was comfortable. She never had to take care of the finances. She had everything that she kind of wanted, but she really wasn't happy. But she would have stayed married forever. And every step of the way was a struggle for her. This fear of like living on her own. And a year after her divorce, she reached out to me and she was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize how unhappy I was until I was on the other side in a place where I was genuinely happy. And so it was like this moment happened for her where she was like, the divorce was so hard, but then it was, yes, like there's so much good on the other side. And some people get there and some don't. Unfortunately, we do see people who stay stuck, and they're the ones who go to trial, or the ones who go back to court over and over and over again and constantly bring in an ex back, or they're constantly embroiled in conflict. And that happens, but it's our goal to try to not let that happen and to really help people see the potential outside of divorce.
That's one of the things that, Kristen and I talk about, why when people go through trauma, some of them can thrive through it and others stay stuck. So is it, do people have to kind of have the mindset and you just nudge them along, or are there like specific things that you can say to them, all right, try look at it this way? Or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both, because sometimes it's just a perspective shift and people are open to it. And then when you start to guide them, they follow, and it's natural for them. It might not be easy, but it's also like they can do it. But then there's other, sometimes you have people who can't do it. They can't go there, and they're stuck, and their mindset is not that growth mindset. It's always going to be scarcity. It's always going to be victimhood. And if you try to teach them, the response is, you don't get it. Or whose side are you on? Sometimes you get that. And it's really hard, as, I'm such an empath. So for a while I took it personally. It's like, but it was a reflection on me, is what I felt, if I couldn't get them through that other side and the way that I had gone through it. But then you just get to the point where you recognize, like, some people aren't going to do that. And often those aren't the people that actually come to our firm, or when they do, they recognize early on that, like, okay, I need someone who's going to be fighting and filing motions and going to court all the time. And we don't do that. It's like lawyering with integrity. If it doesn't feel right, like, yes, we're going to do everything we can to protect your rights and to help you through that. But if it doesn't feel right and you want us to do things just to make the other person's life miserable, like, we're not the good place to go. Like that, where there's lots of other people out there who will do that for you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They motor right through your office and go find the filing people that are going to keep filing. One of the things that's a pillar part of the Brilliantly Resilient process, and it's so hard for so many of us, and I found it my biggest challenge in divorce, is controlling the controllables, like what is really in your control.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to negotiate and stay out of court. I mean, I'm sure that you've seen a ton of practice in getting people to understand what's really in their control and not.
Yeah. I mean, even personally. So like early on in my divorce, I have one son who, when I got divorced, he was 2. He's almost 17 now. But early on, my ex traveled all of the time. And I was sick of like feeling like I had to constantly work around his schedule. And there was a point in my life, like I was like, that's it. I'm going to be completely unreasonable. And when you travel, that's it. You don't get to make up the time. Too bad. Well, I mean, who did that hurt? That hurt my son, and fortunately I was there for like a very short time, and I realized like what a jerk I was being. But it's, I mean, sometimes when you're in that, there's emotion and you get caught up in all of that.
Yeah, so it looks like it looks like I kind of feel like with just the name of your firm alone, people kind of know what to expect. Like this is not going to be that. This is not going to be that place where we're going to come out with the gloves on right away. This is more of a process to not only help you legally, but help you emotionally and kind of personally, maybe process some of the things that, are really intrinsically a part of this, that if you don't recognize that they're there, they can influence every decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've spent a long time doing trial work. So trials happen, litigation happens. It's my least favorite thing to do. In fact, over the past couple of years, I completely stopped doing it just because no one ever wins. And when you do that, you walk into the courtroom and, everyone thinks they're gonna get it over on the other side, and they're going to come out with the win, and both people end up really ticked off at the result, and then they turn back and they blame their lawyers, and the lawyers are like, what happened should have happened this way. Like, this is what the conversation was 3 months ago or 6 months ago when we were trying to settle. So yeah, so yes, it's always nice to do it that way, but sometimes you just have situations, or you have one person who is completely unreasonable or abusive, and it does require a little bit of a stronger stance.
So I want to do a little bit of a shift, because you actually did a book. You don't stop at the adults. You make the fact that when children are involved in this, a pivotal part of this whole process, and you actually provide resources for kids to kind of figure this out, and to help, I guess, the parents, to help them navigate it. Where did that all come from your own experience? Yes.
Yeah. So when I wrote my children's book, Percy's Imperfectly Perfect Family, my son was younger at the time, and he loved penguins. So I sat down with them and was like, all right, if he had a friend who was going through a divorce at the time, and he didn't remember anything of us, his parents, being together. But we had a conversation about, like, if parents were separated, what are the types of things that kids, could possibly struggle with or have pain points. And we kind of talked through it. And because he loved penguins, that was the main character. And so he helped me. I say he kind of co-wrote it because there were resources out there. There's not a ton of resources out there. And a lot of them use, like, the word divorce. And I think that word's scary, but, like, kids don't really get what that word means, but they get how it feels, like they when they have to split homes or split holidays. And that was that was the inspiration behind it.
Wow. When I went through my divorce, which was it was more brutal than most brutals, and my kids, I did build an army around them and went and found every possible resource so they could come through it. But when my daughter came home a few years in, and she was doing okay, and she said one of her best friends, the parents were getting divorced, and we were like locked eyes and hearts. And I was like, listen, you know exactly how that all felt, how the words feel, and people talking behind your back. I'm like, you go to her and let her know you got her. Like, just that, because we didn't have anybody that had been through that yet. And then just that one little conversation of, listen, been through it too, let's make sure that we hang out and check in. And she checked in on her every week. It just makes all the difference for a kid when somebody has some experience with it, because they feel that. And I know, even as a woman in my late 40s, thinking no one else has ever, no one in my town has ever been through this. I'm the loser that's all my own, right? And then you find other people that are like you going through it too, and it just makes all the difference in the world.
And it isn't that shameful that it's like when you, and that was my story too, is I felt like I was going through it all alone. And when I work with other women and they feel like they're going through it all alone, but it doesn't have to be that way. And there's so many resources out there, and there's so many communities. Like, I have a private Facebook group that totally free, but it's just women come together to support each other. And kind of the rule is, like, listen, we're not bashing exes. That's not the purpose of this, but it's to talk through emotions. And a lot of what you hear is, like, the loneliness, the fear. Like, someone had just shared that they were moving out this weekend, and they were equally excited and terrified and grieving and all of that stuff. And to, like, recognize that that's so normal, to feel that whole range of emotions, like the happiness, the peace, the relief, the terror, like all of that is so normal.
So it sounds like you're really helping people to process this on a lot of levels, which is, Kristen said something about, feeling like a loser. And I imagine that whole idea of even if it's not your fault per se, there's like that level of shame. There's so many things that go into this that could prevent this from people seeing it as a healthy thing. It's hard for anybody to see something painful as an ultimately healthy thing. But like, what kind of things can you do or say with someone to kind of make them make that shift in perspective? Because that's got to be hugely important. This is not your fault and you're not a loser. Like, to even get them to that happy part.
Yeah, and there's so many facets to this. One is just putting yourself in a community of other people who get it and understand. I always recommend therapy, counseling. Like if you're ever going to go, this is the time to get that extra support. And there's no shame in that. Like, I have friends who won't even do that because they feel like there's this shame to asking for help, which I'm like, are we still there? Like, are we still in that place that's happening, but people still feel that way? And especially if someone's coming from like a religious background and religion factors in, like, that's another whole conversation. But, one community, but I also I'm a big strategy person and I like action. So it's, sometimes your head won't catch up yet, but it will if you start doing things to if you're stuck in a living in a situation that's bad and the house is going to get sold, like, start exploring where can you possibly go? Start putting together your finances if you've never done it before, and start looking at budgets, get comfortable with numbers, spend the time with that, because sometimes our head is like, no, I don't want this, but you just start doing some practical stuff too. You get a little bit more comfortable with what it looks like. And the first time you look at it, it might be so overwhelming. And then the second time, a little less so. And then maybe 2 months later, it's like a really comfortable thing that you're getting used to your numbers and looking at it, and it's not so scary. So, it's a combination of mindset, community, strategy. I tell people, bring themselves out on a date, go sit at a nice restaurant by yourself. And how many people say they can't do that or have never done that? And it's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm like, you're going to sit there. It's so powerful just to do something so simple. And just sit there and put your phone down and sit there and just enjoy it and recognize okay, I can do this thing by myself and I survived a nice dinner. And what more can I do? Then maybe the next thing is you go away for a night or a weekend, you go to a spa by yourself, and you start doing little baby steps, and you see really what you're capable of and how powerful you are, which is really how that whole shift of the happy even after has transitioned into She Who Wins. Was because, okay, divorce is one part of your story, but it's not the whole story. And making really big, hard decisions is the answer to living a really happy, fulfilled life. And that could be starting the business, taking the risk, moving across country, saying yes, opening your heart up to love after heartbreak. It's all of that risk that is just, it encompasses our entire life. It's not just divorce. That's just one little piece of it that so many of us have gone through.
Wow. I love it. And I think that, you're exactly right. One of the things also in the Brilliantly Resilient process is we talk about just taking one action.
Yeah.
And I realized for me, because you actually hit it right on the head, I was sitting there spinning out of control because there was so much coming at me. Now, mine was, a very unhealthy person. So it was, where could my life get annihilated in every different direction? So I was so paralyzed. But when I just did a good friend of mine said, Kristen, if you don't have any money, you're not going to be able to raise these kids. So let's get your arms around that. And he said to me, how about you just sit there at night and Google women that have blogs that have been through this and their advice financially. It was him saying that I was like, these women have been where I'm at. They lost everything. They want to help me now. And they did. And they knew how to write in a way that I could understand it. And I got to tell you, that was my hardest step. But man, when I started and then I go into the next meeting we started with a mediator. That was a disaster. But I go into the next one and I go, so on Forbes, it says this, and I with the 401k, now am I right here? Because I'm just learning, and then it was I was on to something. So then I was like, let me do that. And I never would have thought I would get. And now where I'm at with being solely responsible for finances and have investment and looking ahead. I never would have been that girl. Never. I was my biggest fear, but that little baby step each time, you're exactly right. It built me some momentum that I've muscled up.
Isn't that powerful though? Then
Yeah.
it's like the next thing that you come across, the next challenge, like I got this, you know, that's not gonna be my demise because I got through something even harder. And now this next thing, yeah, no big deal. So what if I sweat through it? I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, and that's the key, the recognition that it's simple, but it's not easy. Those baby steps are simple, but they're not easy. You know, they're two entirely different things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wanted to hit on something I was reading, doing my due diligence beforehand, and you said something about you are passionate about reinventing yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what you're doing for your clients too, because from everything that I'm hearing, and I've been married, as Kristen says, for 157 years, so I can't quite relate. Can't quite relate to that part of the process, but I can see this idea of having to reinvent yourself as, again, a singular entity.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're married, you know, it's that whole joint entity, that whole, you know, you become two, you become one. So that whole idea of reinventing yourself again as a single person, how much of that plays a big part in what you do and carries on into I want to get to the She Who Wins Summit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if we're not constantly evolving and reinventing ourselves, then we're stuck and stagnant. So sometimes it's through divorce. Sometimes like it's a pivot in a career, or deciding like whatever I had been doing for the first half of my life has come to completion. And now I want to do something else. And like, how can I learn from that? Sometimes it's letting go of friends that no longer are, you know, are not growing with you, and they're keeping you stuck, as like who you surround yourself with matters. You know, I think that we're always, if we're allowing ourselves to be open to growth and opportunity, we should always be reinventing and looking at, you know, is this still serving me? And that is the whole transition to the She Who Wins, because I noticed that there was the community I was talking to. It was like, all right, so we get through the divorce, and now what? And some of them have to start careers that they never had before, or go back to school, or find jobs, become the sole income provider for their household. And there were so many other things. It was like, all right, doing that big, scary thing for might be the divorce. It might also be living in a house by yourself and having to deal with the snow removal during the winter. It might be starting the business that you've always wanted to do. You know, it might be traveling by yourself. It's like, if you're always doing something really uncomfortable, that means you're growing and evolving. And that was the whole point of She Who Wins. And my literary agent a couple of years ago, we had a divorce book that we were pitching. And I said to her, I'm like, you know what, that book is not the one I want to write anymore. I want to write a book called She Who Wins. And it has to be bigger. It has to be about taking risk, because women are so used to like playing it safe and kind of playing it a little small and not taking big risks. Like we've been raised to be the good girl. And you know, what happens if we shake that up? What happens if we have really uncomfortable conversations and set some really strict boundaries that we now enforce? And what happens when we stop trying to please other people and we start living for ourselves? Well, something amazing can happen. And, you know, that's that whole concept of like continuing to evolve and grow and challenge yourself.
And that is She Who Wins.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the whole title. I actually started putting in all my new passwords when I was creating passwords. Wins is in there somehow. Look, now everybody can hack into my stuff, but the word win is in all of my things. And it might be like, she doesn't know what she's doing, but she's going to win. Like I have all these crazy things that I'm like, I love it. I love this whole concept, She Who Wins.
Thank you.
So do you think that, you know, that a part of this whole idea of winning, you talked about she who moves forward fiercely is She Who Wins, is a part of the reason we aren't fierce, because we feel an obligation to keep everybody else safe?
Yeah.
I feel like, especially if you have children and you're a mom, like that's your thing. I got to keep my kids safe. And after a while, that cautiousness starts to spill over everywhere.
Yeah.
And how do you, like for somebody who's not going through a divorce or a trauma, how do you shake yourself out of that?
Yeah. I love that question. So I have this, we're so afraid of failing, and it's like, we don't celebrate that. And it's like, and I think about it, and part of the book that I do have, She Who Wins, it's coming out in 2023, is I have a whole chapter on like failing really proudly, and like sharing your failures to like normalize it and recognize that's always part of the journey, because you're going to fail 10 times, and then that 11th time you'll succeed, and whoa, is that going to be amazing. But you're not going to succeed on the first time. I mean, who does? It's just not, it's not possible. It's like even speaking, and you shared that I had this fear of public speaking. And it's like every time I do it now, I'm like, you know what? It's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect every time. I look at other people and like, wow, they're so good. Well, they got that way because they've done it over and over and over again. And they weren't probably that good the first time they got on stage, So it's like just that practicing and getting comfortable with not being perfect. So many of us have that like perfectionist syndrome. Like if we can't make it perfect, we're not going to do it. Like that's garbage. Just show up like imperfectly and do it anyway, because you grow and you learn, and maybe the next time you're a little better, or you redirect and you're like, oh, this isn't for me, and I'm going to pivot to something else. And that's growth too, is just recognizing that.
And you know what? I got to tell you, and you probably believe this too. The more you fail, the more people like you. Then you're not annoyingly perfect.
Yeah.
People reach out to me all the time. Thanks for sharing that Kickstarter didn't work in July because my stuff didn't work either. You're amazing. Let me know when you get the next one going.
The first time I ever filmed like video for social media, I spent an entire day filming, I think 2 like 3-minute clips, and I deleted both of them. I was so focused on like it being perfect. And now it's like, I'll throw a hat on, I want to makeup on, I'll hop on. And those are the ones that like people respond to, because people don't want perfect. They want to know like, oh, okay, I can like be imperfect. I can be messy and like just do it messy. And that's totally okay.
Yeah, I love
it. And that all circles back to your helping people find their authentic selves and be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Whether it's alone, or whether it's, in some kind of a relationship or whatever. Kristen and I, when we started Brilliantly Resilient, we had no idea what we were doing. And we just were like, okay, well, we know, because we had this big plan. Kristen calls it the World Takeover Tour that we were supposed to do. We're supposed to go out and speak. And we started Brilliantly Resilient on March 7th, like 2020, like a week before the world shut down entirely. But the point was, when we decided to go on the air and do this, we were just like, hey, nobody else knows what they're doing right now. So, and we made it a point, though, to share that with people and tell them, look, we don't know where this is going. Nobody knows where anything's going these days. And I think maybe some of the things that you're talking about are helping people to get comfortable with that. I don't know exactly where you're going to end up, but it could be happy even after.
And you know what? It absolutely will be, if you just keep taking a step forward and you don't get stuck and like just become complacent. Absolutely. And it's so funny, because when I had this, it was last year, I like randomly thought that it would be a great idea to do a live event. Never planned a live event before. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And I booked it, and then I had like a major panic attack. I was like, oh my God, what if no one shows up? I don't have that many cousins around to like fill the seats. Like, what am I going to do? And then I almost canceled it. And I'm like, well, that's really stupid. Like, why don't I just see what happens? And what's the worst that happens? There's a handful of people. Okay, so what? And it's like, what's the big deal? Then I won't be showing the footage of the audience if there's 10 people, but and we ended up selling out, and we're having a bigger one next year. So it's like, you don't know what's going to happen unless you take that risk and put yourself out there and risk failing.
I love it. I could talk to you all day, but I know we have to wind up. This is so fantastic.
So to that end, we really do want everybody to know where they can find you, where they can learn more about not only your work and your resources for kids and all, but the She Who Wins Summit.
Yeah, so Instagram is my favorite place to hang out. I'm always like checking DMs and responding. So my handle is at Ms. Renee Bauer, or they can go to shewhowins.com, and that's information all about the summit that's happening on April 28th and 29th at Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut.
Okay, everybody, you have to know there is a happy even after. It is available to you. You just have to act, keep taking that step, surround yourself with good people and a good tribe. And by all means, check out Ms. Renee Bauer and her happy even after and the She Who Wins Summit. Going to turn it over to my partner right now.
I didn't realize that this summit is happening just up 95 in Connecticut. Interesting. We're just down in Philly. That would be super fun if we could work that in. And I love this whole She Wins, so She Who Wins. So everybody go and follow Renee on the social media platforms, and make sure you go to brilliantlyresilient.net, sign up to get our Brilliance Bit that comes to your inbox once a week. It is a less than 1 minute read, because we don't have time to be doing things that take longer than that, because we got to win at other things at our brilliance. So make sure you go get that, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Join our Facebook group and follow us on YouTube to be inspired with tools to reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance.